What's up, guys? It's Jan for Chess24. A new super tournament has started in Bilbao. The main headline was that this is the maybe last encounter between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and his future challenger Sergei Karjakin. But in the first round, Carlsen had a very different challenge and one that he normally welcomes because he faced his favorite opponent, the US-American Hikaru Nakamura. And it is well documented that Carlsen has a tremendous plus score against Hikaru Nakamura. 12 wins, I believe 18 draws and 0 defeats. Pretty much unheard of at this level. Still, the game always has to be played starting from this position where Carlsen, with the white pieces, went for the move 1e4. His favorite move, even though he's capable of doing everything else as well. Nakamura, not on the mood for a Berlin, goes for c5. He is quite a Najdorf expert as well. The Najdorf, of course, being knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6. But Carlsen has different ideas for this game, and already in the second move he plays a rare continuation, the move knight to e2. This keeps the option open of going for d4 and going for some open Sicilian. But there are some, I'm not sure if we can call it subtleties. It's an attempt to get black out of his usual scheme. For example, let's say we play the Najdorf a6 and you play the move g3 here. Here the main move is e5, which Nakamura would probably have chosen, which is supposed to be decent for black. And Carlsen is trying to navigate the game into a similar position while reducing black's options a bit. I hope that's gonna make sense in a second. Nakamura goes for d6, showing his intentions to play the Najdorf. Carlsen starts with knight bc3. He wants to go g3, bishop g2. But if you go g3 here immediately, which looks more flexible because you keep this pawn free to maybe go c3, d4, there's a problem. The black can, at the loss of a tempo, play the move d5 here. And if white were to take that after ed, queen d5, it's very awkward for white that his rook on h1 is attacked. Therefore, Carlsen delays g3 for a move, goes knight bc3. Nakamura once again shows his intentions to play the Najdorf, goes a6, giving white another chance to transpose with d4. But Carlsen delays d4, goes g3, and his point is if black plays, let's say, bishop knight f6 now, bishop g2, then it's not obvious how black wants to arrange his pawns. If he goes e6, then white goes d4, takes, and black has forfeited the option of playing the system with e5 I just showed you. So it's not really an attempt to get the game out of theory, but to move order Nakamura into something he's maybe less comfortable with. However, white also had to make some concessions. He went g3, and Nakamura decides to parry that by playing g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, when in this position that ensues after d4, which was played in the game, c takes d, knight takes d4, knight f6, the position has more of a dragon character, and against a dragon, g3, bishop g2 is not really supposed to be the most critical of setups. However, black also had to play a6, which he probably wouldn't play, at least not as quickly if this came from a dragon move order. So give some, get some, both sides had to make some concessions to reach this position, which is relatively fresh. Castles, still nothing new under the sun. This has been played before. a4, h3 are the main continuations. Carlsen goes his own way, goes for the move b3, preparing to fianchetto this bishop, something you don't often see in open Sicilians. But here it makes sense. b3, amongst other things, stops black's very typical knight tour towards c4, and he wants to create an antagonist for the strong bishop, the dragon bishop on g7. Knight to c6, logical. And now the first surprise for me, well, you could call everything a surprise, but a very surprising decision by the world champion. He goes knight takes c6. Normally in such positions you either see white keeping the knights on the board, a move like knight d2, tending to keep all the pieces and then develop bishop b2, a4, h3 with complex strategical play, or white could play bishop b2, allowing this exchange of knights with what I would guess is a roughly equal position after, for example, knight g4 attacking the queen. Carlsen takes on c6, which has pros and cons. This, according to my database, this has only been played once, but not by top players, so we can't call this a very fresh position. B takes c6, we see the first con, the black center is strengthened. Black gains additional control over the d5 square, and we all learned in chess school that you're normally happy to capture towards the center to increase your influence there. There are drawbacks with this, however, as well. Black loses quite some dynamic options. You can no longer go for the typical Sicilian push b7 to b5 to gain space on the queen side. And the half-open b file, which you would normally gain, doesn't really promise much with a white pawn on b3. So knight takes c6. It's an interesting strategic decision, showing Carlsen's willingness to play fresher pawn structures where maybe he can feel he can outplay his opponent. After bishop b2, the white plan is not that hard. You want to go knight to a4, then you want to go c4, increase your grip on the center, and then prepare one of these pawn breaks with either e5 or c5 to hurt the black structure and maybe expose the pawn on c6 as a potential weakness. Black has many ways here to arrange his pieces. One typical setup would be, I don't even know how to do this, let's say rook b8, knight a4, queen c7, c4. Put your pawn on c5, then put the bishop to b7 with complicated situation strategically. I'm not sure if any side is better here, but I'm sure Carlsen would have been quite comfortable with this. Black could also immediately move this knight, preparing to exchange these bishops after knight a4 takes. Play a position like this. Once again, I believe it's slightly easier to play with white, but I'm not sure we can speak of an objective advantage. Nakamura decided to play the move queen a5. This creates some one-move threats with knight takes e4, but of course that doesn't happen against Carlsen. Carlsen goes for knight a4, part of the plan, and Nakamura, to justify his queen sortie, he goes bishop to g4, attacking the white queen and also, believe it or not, fighting for the h5 square for his queen. If white played the naive f3, black would remove his bishop. Now this bishop is blocked on this long diagonal, can no longer do any damage to the c6 pawn. And the queen would gain access to this square if it so chose. But Carlsen plays a stronger move, very much in his style. Quiet little sidestep, the move queen to e1. He doesn't mind a queen exchange, and after queen takes e1, rook a takes e1. Black's position does seem a little unpleasant indeed. e5 is in the air, white still has a strengthening plan with c4. There's also the idea of maybe going f4, f5, cutting this bishop off on g4. So black has to be careful here. He's by no means lost after, let's say, knight d7, but white's position seems a little easier to play. Many ways to continue. Bishop takes is very logical. You can also start with f4. If bishop takes b2, knight takes b2, f5 might be a threat, and you can improve your position with many moves. Therefore, quite a comfortable endgame for white, and Hikaru Nakamura decided to not allow that, but play a different move, the move queen h5. This move, while it looks nice and active, controlling some squares here, seems like it has one big drawback, because it allows white the immediate breakthrough e4, e5. Carlsen did not play that, and I still don't really understand why. Knight d5 is not a good move, because now c4 and c6 is hanging, the black position more or less collapses. Also e takes d6 is coming. So it does look like you pretty much have to take on e5, and here after queen takes e5, white can exchange queens under more favorable circumstances, because now he's already exposed some weaknesses on the black queen side. Queen e5, bishop e5. Can't see anything better than knight to d5, but this looks like a very comfortable endgame. Rook e1, and white has many ways to strengthen his position, while black seems to be facing a long, unpleasant defense. So I'm surprised that Carlsen did not go for this immediate e5. Said he played the move f3, also logical, asking his bishop where he wants to go. Nakamura decides to offer the exchange of bishops with bishop h3. Bishop e6, also a viable option, when white would probably just go c4, strengthening his position. Bishop h3, Carlsen decides on another double-edged move. Should stop saying decides, I guess, but not yet. I'll decide to use it a bit more. Plays g4, forcing this queen back to h6, but of course weakening some dark squares on the queen side, on the king side in the process. White cannot exploit this awkward queen's position on h6 immediately if he tries to win a pawn here by going bishop c1, forcing g5, and now bishop takes h3, queen takes h3, bishop takes g5, and black has a little tactic with knight takes g4, and he's gonna win his material back after f3, bishop a1. The complications favor black, so you can't go for that yet, and if you decided to be extra clever and take here first, then you would probably win a pawn but regret your decision after knight to h5, when black puts his knight on f4 and gains tremendous compensation for that pawn. Not gonna happen against the world champion. Carlsen plays the best move, the move rook to d1, still preparing bishop c1 without having his rook awkwardly placed in the corner on this long diagonal. Nakamura, anticipating bishop c1, goes for g5, blocking this diagonal immediately. Has some strength, this move positionally. It increases grip over the f4 and h4 squares, also slightly weakens his king, of course. If a white knight ever made it here, that could be bad news. Carlsen once again had many logical options. c4 certainly possible. Queen e3 looks like a decent move. Could also make a case for, I don't know, bringing this knight closer to the center, knight b6, knight c4. But he decides on the move bishop c1, now posing the threat of bishop takes a3, followed by bishop takes g5. Nakamura reacts, takes on g2, and goes queen g6, unpinning. But the queen, of course, is a little out of play, and it seems like that fact provoked Carlsen to try to open the position up instantly by going h4. Once again, you could absolutely continue to play positionally, play c4, increase your grip on the d5 square, also get the c2 pawn out of the line of fire, when I think white is still a bit better, has a nice grip on the position in the center. But Carlsen went for h4, immediately asking black what he's up to. If black were to defend with h6, both h takes g, now either c4 or maybe even rook h1, look very, very promising for white. Both this and h5, I was going to say, because h5 forces the queen to h7, which is not the most active square in the world either. So that's not really an option, therefore Nakamura decides to take on h4, and Carlsen plays the logical move, recaptures on h4, but it looks like his spider sense for potential counterplay let him down here a bit, because now black can go d5 and chip away at the white construction in the center. There was one very interesting way to prevent this d5 break, which was now to play the move knight to b6. The rook should probably go to d8 and knight to c4. This pawn doesn't really run away, it can't be covered, and white managed to stop the black breakthrough in the center because after d5 you can see the engine bar going crazy here, since knight e5 traps the queen on g6. And having stopped black's main idea with d5, white would still have a decent position after queen takes h4, h5, g5 doesn't change that fact. Instead, Carlsen recaptured the pawn immediately, but after d5, which Nakamura of course played, things are no longer so easy. e5, knight d7 is not really promising for white, f6 would follow. The best white can do is probably to just be humble, take on d5, c takes d, play c3, removing this pawn from the attack. When black has improved his structure quite significantly, the position would be roughly equal. I guess white should try to exchange queens with queen g5 and play this more or less equal endgame. Not what the world champion wanted though after d5. He kept his foot on the gas, went for the move g5. But turns out this move is not really the greatest idea he ever had, because gf6 is not a threat, since this pawn is pinned for now, and black has time to capture on e4, picking up a pawn. My guess is that Carlsen, of course he didn't miss that, but he relied on his reply, the move f4, threatening f5, once again trapping this queen on g6. And, well, I'm not sure if this is true, but I have a feeling he might have missed the very simple reply played by Nakamura, the move e6, just parrying this f5 threat, and it turns out that black emerges pawn up. Of course, that doesn't mean you automatically win against the world champion, but it's still a good start and very rare that we see Carlsen ruining a very good position like this one within just, 3 moves, g5, de4, and all of a sudden it's a very bad position. Still, the world champion of course fought on, went for the move c4, controlling the d5 square, so this knight at least can't jump there. The knight doesn't have to move yet though, because it's still pinned. Nakamura goes rook fd8, fighting for the d file, and so preparing this knight e8 maneuver, which we're gonna see in a second. Carlsen brings, no, he doesn't bring his knight yet. He went for the move rook de1, another small concession, abandoning the, very hard to speak, abandoning the d file. But there's nothing great for white. Bishop e3 might look logical, but that's met with a very powerful move h5. once again exploiting this pin of the g-pawn and preparing for this knight to jump into g4, and that would be extremely unpleasant for white. So Carlsen instead tries to keep an eye on the e4 pawn by going rook d1. Nakamura finds another strong maneuver, goes knight e8 now, intending to bring this knight all the way to f5 if possible. Knight c5 attacks e4, knight d6 defends it, and since knight f5 is a big threat, the white queen has to go away. Queen f2, but if you have to retreat like that, it's already a sign that things are not going well. Pawn down, weaker king, you have to retreat your pieces, something has gone very, very wrong. Nakamura has a tempting choice here, many moves are strong. Bishop c3 was interesting, to maybe target this knight from b4. h6, always an option to soften the white king even further. a5 is a decent move. Knight f5, even sacrificing the pawn, came into consideration. Many options, but Nakamura plays a move that I quite like. He plays the move f5 for the, feels like fifth time exploiting that this pawn is not allowed to move, strengthening his formation in the center, leaves him with a protected passed pawn on e4 and also with a clear plan. He wants to put the knight on f7 and then undermine the white construction by going either e5 or h6 when the white king would start feeling the heat. Hard to stop that plan. Carlsen decided to exchange bishops, bishop b2, knight f7, bishop g7, king g7, queen to g3. He's fighting against e5 for the moment and against h6. But Nakamura is not in a hurry. Goes rook to d6, preparing to double rooks on the d-file. You don't want both of these rooks up in your business, so Carlsen decides to exchange one of them. Goes rook d1, rook a d8. The a6 pawn is insignificant. White will never have time to capture it because after rook d6, whenever he decides to take, black just activates way too quickly. Here, for example, rook d3, queen h4, rook d2, let's say king h1 and e5. And with this knight out of play, the black pieces are just gonna violate the white king side. So Carlsen is forced to stay more or less passive, goes queen c3 to cover the d2 square, king g8, rook f2, once again trying to cover all the entry squares, knight a6, rook d3 was still no good. But Nakamura finds new inroads, goes queen h5, and his queen could activate to either g4 of course, or all the way to d1. Queen g4 check can't be allowed, so Carlsen goes queen h3, offering an exchange of queens. This endgame would also be pleasant for black, but no need to go for it. Now this pawn might finally become a real weakness and white might gain a bit of counterplay. The white king is also weaker than the black king, so Nakamura correctly decides to keep queens on the board, goes queen to d1. Once again, asking many unpleasant questions, like how would you want to react to queen d4 followed by e3? Carlsen decides not to allow that, goes queen e3. And now Nakamura feels the time is ripe to open the position up even further by playing e5. Making white face even more very tough decisions. In a bad position, there's no good moves, and this one is no exception. If f takes e5, black would just go rook to g6, wouldn't even recapture, but go rook g6, threatening rook takes g5 or knight takes g5, with a quick end for the white king. Carlsen tries queen g3, doesn't really help his chances either, just trying to maintain this formation. But black just plays rook g6, renewing the threat of ef4, followed by something takes on g5, and the white defenses are notably crumbling. King h2, move 37. Here Nakamura plays a very natural move, the move e takes f4, but he could have played even more forcefully. One quick way to end this game would have been queen to d4, targeting this knight, and whatever, let's say knight takes a6, then e3, and the white position is beyond repair. If this rook stays here, ef wins on the spot, and if it goes somewhere else, then the e-pawn will decide the day. So that would have probably ended the game a bit more quickly, but e takes f4 does not really ruin anything, and it had the advantage that after queen takes f4, it's move 38, and Nakamura can now repeat moves to make it to the time control on move 40. Queen h5 check, king d1, queen d1 check, king h2, queen h5 check, king g1. And now he had all the time in the world on move 41 to calculate the position to, I'm not sure if till the end, but as far as he needed to, and he decided he could just go knight takes g5 without fearing any white checks. Not that rook takes g5 was bad, but after rook g2 there is nothing decisive inside just yet. Therefore knight takes g5, if it works, is just stronger, because any knight check would pretty much end the game. Carlsen tries to fight against that. Whoa, we got a visitor here. Goes queen b8 check, king g7, queen e5 check, king h6. No more checks, you can't allow this knight to move, so Carlsen pins it. Goes queen f4. Nakamura still has to find a way to break the white defensive setup. Not that there was only one way. One way, for example, that wasn't played in the game would be queen g4 check, queen takes g4, and now a little trick, knight to f3 check. When, if white moves a king, let's say king f1, rook takes g4, it's just game over. This is a threat, and this black formation will just decide the game instantly. While if white were to take this, rook takes g4, little Zwischenschach, followed by e takes f3 with a whole exchange up and also an easy win. But Nakamura once again decides to keep queens on the board. Absolutely nothing wrong with this. Queen d1 check, king to h2, and queen to d4. This is a very strong maneuver that overstretches the white defense as well. This knight doesn't have anywhere good to go. After knight takes a6, king g7, black would unpin. And we're gonna see something similar in the game. White runs out of checks fast, and then knight f3 check will decide the issue. Carlsen instead tried b4, and he has one last trick up his sleeve. Because after king g7, which was played, once again, with a lethal threat of knight f3 check, he gives what looks like a spy check, queen c7, king h8, queen c8, rook g8, checks have expired, tough word, and knight f3 check or queen f2 is coming. But the last trick I mentioned is that after queen takes f5, knight f3 check, this happened in the game, king to h3, black should not be too greedy and capture this rook, because you can see the engine bar goes crazy, since white all of a sudden has a perpetual queen f6, rook g7, queen f8, rook g8, queen f6 with a draw. That of course did not happen. Nakamura had taken his time after move 40 to calculate everything, and that included this move, queen to d6, keeping all the checking squares covered, while threatening some checks of his own with queen h6 or queen g3 checkmate. It's impossible to parry both of them without losing all of your material. Therefore, the world champion did resign in this position and loses his first ever classical chess game to Hikaru Nakamura. Very strange game. I liked Carlsen's opening play, but then he temporarily lost his mind. I'm not quite sure what happened. Here for a couple moves, h4 was still okay, but queen h4 was inaccurate, and after d5, probably unhappy with what he had done, he did not go for e takes d5, maintaining an equal position, but instead just gave a pawn and never saw it back and never saw any compensation for it. Nakamura kept his cool and converted this very convincingly. Nakamura, as far as I heard, said it wasn't a big deal, but of course he was happy to for once defeat Magnus Carlsen, and we'll see how that affects their future matchups, if Nakamura will have more confidence facing the world champion now that he finally slayed that dragon, or if it's an outlier. We shall see. Certainly it's not a good start to the tournament for Magnus Carlsen, but he's been a bit of a slow starter in many of his recent tournaments. There's still a lot of play to come. To my mind, he is still the favorite to win the event, but it's not a great start to lose to his rival, whom he had dominated in the past with the white pieces. Congratulations to Hikaru Nakamura for a nice victory, and we shall see in the rounds to come if the world champion can recover for this. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you're watching this on the day I made it, then there is still a lot of live commentary to be done for both Bilbao and Dortmund, so check that out on Chess24. I'll be doing live commentary most of these days. If not, I hope you liked it anyway, and I'll see you guys soon.